very much to Executive Director, Chairman, right, for inviting us to come here. Jay is also very instrumental in this work. This is not going to work, so you can tell that I have been a teacher in the past. I need to get involved with what I'm seeing and doing. Okay, maybe that'll work. Maybe I should take my shoes off. Okay. So we have, as Frank said, we have been working very hard with some interagency collaboration, Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, our stakeholders in the field. We would love the opportunity, and it's why we're excited here today, to talk much more directly and frankly and openly with the business communities in our state, and also so that we can both understand and hear your perspectives on issues that might arise after the presentation or from the report, and then also just engage in, hopefully, a new state of affairs where we try to collaborate together more intentionally as we move forward. So as Mr. Coffey said, I think I need to say Mr. Coffey in this context, what we're going to do is provide a little bit of an overview for career and technical education, understanding that for some folks that might be a review. I apologize in advance. For others it might be new information, so hopefully this will be interesting to you. And then we'll move into, from the Agency of Education's perspective, what we really are trying to move toward in terms of a future vision for CTE. I will say right off the bat, it is not a vision that we can achieve alone, just with our agency. And so we're really, again, coming today to hopefully partner and get some feedback on this plan, and then also generate some healthy discussion about next steps and how we move forward. So if you're not familiar with career and tech education, which I'm going to now call CTE forevermore today, it's a set of courses and experiences. It's certainly focused on students gaining very practical skills. It's along with technical knowledge and technical know-how, but also there really is a core academic foundation that's being built in CTE, and that's something that it's really important for us to mention. It certainly has real-world experience and application that, if we're doing it right, leads to high skill, high demand, high wage careers. We really see it from a statewide perspective as a key resource for personalized, contextualized learning, which for those of you who have been following some aspects of education, that's a real push in terms of flexible pathways. Act 77 is the piece of legislation that has actually talked about personalization and contextualization for all students, not just students who are actually involved in programs with career and tech ed. We also think certainly that CTE experiences for students are critically linked with college and career readiness, broadly speaking. Okay, so and we're going to talk a little bit later today about that kind of continuum approach. So college and career readiness, the idea, if you haven't heard of that, you probably have, is that once a student graduates, they are prepared for whatever they would like to do, whether they would like to enter the workforce, make a livable wage, whether they would like to go on to some further post-secondary education, whether they would like to do a registered apprenticeship, and so on and so forth. We really see CTE as a critical component of that model. Where is CTE happening? Hopefully this will be of interest to most of you, because I know that you represent a statewide geography today. I'm not sure you can see this as well as I would hope, but there are a number of different types of ways and sort of structures that CTE is occurring in our state. So we have 3 independent technical center districts, which really function as their own entity. They have their own board. They have their own governance structure that's pretty separate from, they are linked with the high school and they partner with the high school, but it's a separate governance structure. We also have some satellite locations of comprehensive high schools. And so these are up in the northeastern corner around Canaan, and then in the northwestern corner, Franklin Northwest, Swanton, Missisquoi Valley, that area. We also have 2 independent schools who host technical education programs. So they're not schools that are in the public school system, and these are the Academy, St. John's Ware Academy, and then Linden Institute. So again, they have a somewhat unique way that they offer their courses, services, their experience for students. And then finally, the most typical and the most, I think, kind of common way of offering career education is we tend to think of as these full or part-time regional career centers. And so we have those somewhat throughout the state, but you can see certain pockets where they're not in operation, but something like an independent technical center district is. So I'm looking at the lower west corner of the state. How many students are we talking about? For last school year, about 5,400 Vermont high school students in grades 11 and 12, which is who is entitled to, who has eligibility for career and tech education, participated. This is a really interesting snapshot, a longitudinal look at what's been happening over time with participation rates for CTE. So the punchline here is that although, as I'm sure you know, the numbers of students, school-age students, has declined over time in the past 10 years. In fact, from last year to this, we actually lost 1,200 more K-12 students statewide. Yes. I see Matt making a grimace back there. So we're in the midst of our demographic plunge, if you will. What's really interesting about CTE participation is that against this decline in overall student numbers, we actually see a bit of an uptick in CTE participation over time. So participation in CTE has increased a little over 2%. Again, we think that's pretty telling in terms of interest in CTE, opportunities that we might think of providing even more for our students with, again, these kinds of collaborative exchanges that we hope to talk about today. One of the things that's also important to note is that this looks to be, this bump looks to be more linked with not full-blown CTE program participation, so not enrolling in a full program, but enrolling in perhaps pre-tech and or some modules around career and tech education. And we think that's actually really fascinating and something we want to continue to think about and talk with folks about. It might be much easier, for instance, to convince a student that taking a smaller module of CTE experiences or courses is very useful and beneficial to them, as opposed to having enroll in a full-blown 2-year-long program. So it's just something for us to think about. That might not be the case. It's just, we're wondering about that. Okay, what do the outcomes look like in terms of CTE? So we talk about CTE students who concentrated, this is a federal definition, they completed at least half of their required sequence of instruction, so they are in those programs that I talked about. 99% of these students who concentrated do in fact graduate from high school. So if you're not familiar, in Vermont we have a very high high school graduation rate overall. We typically duke it out with Massachusetts for a top spot. There's always still room for improvement. We're not at 100%, but we're very high. And our CTE students are doing very well on that indicator. In terms of industry recognized credentials, which is perhaps more important to folks here, 67% of those concentrators do leave with an IRC, and examples of this are an LNA, game of logging, or Cisco networking certification. So there's definitely room for improvement in that. It would be great if it were 99% were leaving with an industry recognized credential. I'm not sure we would have enough industry recognized credentials to have that be a possibility, but I look to my CTE state director for either nodding or shaking his head. He's not responding, so to be determined. Dual enrollment, which as I hope at least some folks here are familiar with, has been a big push from our legislature. It's been a big push in terms of the college and career readiness discussion. So if you're not familiar with what dual enrollment is, it's students take a course in their junior or senior year. It's covered fully by the state, and there's a reduced tuition that the post-secondary institution agrees to abide by. And the credits, they can take up to 2 courses, and those credits actually count towards both their high school graduation credits, and then also they're true college courses. And so they have kind of a 2-for-1, if you're not familiar with dual enrollment. 11% of our CTE students have received at least one transcripted course, so they've actually completed at least one of these dual enrollment opportunities. It's a voucher system. And then in terms of college enrollment, so moving on towards further higher education, further formalized education, a little over 40%, 41% of our students who participated in CTE go on for post-secondary education. What's kind of fascinating, but perhaps not surprising about this overall statistic I find is that there's a big gender difference here. So of female students who are enrolled in CTE programs, 60% of them go on to post-secondary education, whereas only 40% of males, of boys who are enrolled in CTE go on. Can I just go through and then hold questions? Is that okay? Yeah. Is that okay? There's also a differential of who goes into CTE, which is just to confuse things a little. 60% of students that go into CTE, 9 through 12 CTE, are boys, and 40% are girls. So there's something about that particular ratio that keeps popping up. Okay, what do the curricula, if you will, or the broad sweep content of our current CTE system, what does that look like? So right now it's organized into career clusters and pathways. There are 6 of them. I'll read sort of the 30,000-foot level because you probably can't see this in the back of the room. So we have agriculture and natural resources, arts and communications, engineering and technical systems, health and human services, public services, and then business systems. So within each of these career clusters and pathways, there are actually already some high-skill, high-wage, high-demand pathways that have been mapped out. So I'm trying to look at one. Within health sciences, for instance, even I can't see this. We've got diagnostic services and therapeutic services. So those are already set up to be helping students get into those high-demand, high-wage career opportunities later on. We've also identified health services because there has been a lot going on already with health services and career studies and programs of study, as I'm going to talk with you a little bit about. And so we're gonna continue work initially on health services, to health sciences, to actually get that squared away as we move forward. The other thing I would just say about that last slide is, if you could think about, perhaps if you're not aware of, which of those potential clusters or sets of career pathways actually map closely onto your particular place, your particular business, your particular sector. That would be great, I think, for the conversations that we're going to have later today. I'm sorry that I'm dry throat. Okay. So how are we thinking about the future of CTE? I just gave you an overview of what we currently look like. If we think about a simple example such as automobile manufacturing, here is a great schematic we found of really thinking about, it's never happened to me before. Usually I'm pretty good, sorry. This was early 1900s. This is 21st century on the right. So if you think about how the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities needed for this work have changed, that's one of the things that we have in mind as we're trying to help statewide our CTE centers make the best choices for offerings for students, programs of study, and those kinds of things. So I don't know if you can tell, but one of the biggest pieces that you're probably all very familiar with is that there are a lot of humans, a lot of people in the early 1900s on the assembly line for cars. What about now? You can't see because it's not the best graphic, and I apologize, but it's all mechanical robotic arms, okay? Does that mean we don't need people here, though? No, we need people. They need to know how to operate those arms and how to fix them when they break down and those kinds of things. So that's kind of just hopefully an example of the kind of thinking that we're hoping to entertain and get folks thinking about today. We're really trying to figure out how to, all of us, how to forecast what we need in the future, which is really tough. But we think this is a great example of just to start out with, like thinking about all that's changed just in a pretty small period of time, not huge. Okay. This has direct implications for our perceptions as a state, how we think about career and technical education. What we would argue is how we hope we will continue or will change and think about career and technical education in the future. In the past, it really was a vocational education model. It was for a few students, for a few jobs. There were a pretty small number of program areas in the past for career and technical education, which wasn't called that, it was called vocational. It was in lieu of academics, so students were either directly or indirectly given messages that academics was not their thing, so why not try this other woodshop experience over here. And it was really high school focused. Okay, so as I've already shown you, we're not really there anymore, okay, so we really aren't. We have moved, I think we have much more movement to make, but we are moving and need to move into a more sophisticated understanding of career and tech education. It's for all students, potentially. It's for all careers. There are very few careers where you can't identify at least some kind of technical knowledge that would be useful in a particular career. We now have currently 16 career clusters with 79 different pathways. We might think about whether that's a little too many. Maybe we want to be more strategic, which I'm going to get to in just a sec. It's highly integrated with academics, or it should be. That's what we're hoping to see. And really, we should be having high school and college, and I would say sector and industry business partnerships as well as part of this. What do the jobs and evolving careers of the future require? You hear a lot about 21st century skills. So we know, and the graphic or the picture that I just showed you illustrated, that a lot of the more low-wage, low-skilled jobs, and these are national perspectives, have been outsourced. Machines have replaced many of the more rote tasks that have been previously done in the workplace. And as I mentioned earlier, skills are now needed that are potentially much more technical, much more high level. Certainly what we as a nation talk about is needing more flexibility and ability for our students that we graduate to think from an entrepreneurial perspective because they don't know what the future is going to hold. So to have that nimble mindset, the ability to kind of think on their feet, and to be innovative and reinvent oneself. Those are the kinds of 21st century skills that we think are happening in our career and tech education system, and we think are a good thing. There will also be required higher levels of post-secondary education in order to achieve economic comfort and stability. Now, when I say post-secondary education, I'm not just talking about a 4-year college degree, and I think that's really critical. For a lot of students, that's what they think when you say post-secondary education. First of all, they don't probably usually know what that means. And then when you say college, they think that you're talking about going just to UVM or going to a 4-year college. For some students, that's great, and that makes the best sense. For some students, it's some kind of training experience after high school. For some students, it's, that brings some credential, a valuable credential, but is not really linked to a degree. For some students, it's actually a 2-year degree that will actually best meet their needs. So I think that's really important, and it's something that I think we can all use as a state in terms of helping support all of our students and our youth in terms of finding the best pathway for them that will help the business community, because you'll find the right folks that want to be with what you're offering. The future of Vermont, the future of Vermont requires some work, as I think you know, has already been done in this sphere. So the SEDS work actually identified a number of priority sectors that are intimately linked with what's going on in Vermont. The last slide was more of a broader global perspective. But here we have the 6 priority sectors that folks at a state level have, folks who are much more knowledgeable than me, I should indicate, have actually identified as the places where we need to really invest our educational resources, our training resources, other kinds of investments, so that we actually have an economically viable state and we actually are flourishing. If you're not familiar with this framework, the 6 identified sectors are travel, tourism, and business systems. So this would include culinary, hospitality, accounting, management, and entrepreneurship, some of the pieces that I just talked about a little bit ago. Manufacturing and engineering, and STEM is also included in that, science, technology, engineering, and math. Construction, particularly green building and design. Local food systems, agriculture, natural resources. Information technology, with a particular focus on, I think, some of the more softer aspects, if you will, of IT, networking, software development, website design, as opposed to the more hard working with the actual circuits and things of that nature. You can tell that this is not an area that I'm quite that familiar with. How did I do? Anyone? And then health, medical. So that is also a priority sector that, again, we need to invest in as a state and make sure that we have the right kinds of individuals prepared for those jobs in the future. We have invested as the Agency of Ed, and certainly in partnership with our career and tech ed colleagues, in career pathways that mirror, and I mentioned some of the specifics a little bit ago, but they mirror those career clusters. So what they are is not just coursework, but it's also work-based learning experiences, internships, particular support services that actually all help the student advance to higher levels of future employment and education in that particular career area. It's very common, there are very few of the domains in CTE that you could actually really understand what you're doing without actually having that very practical, experiential experience during your CTE program. Here is one example of a career pathway. If you're unfamiliar with this lens or this way of thinking, it's for therapeutic services, one of the identified components in health sciences, as I talked about earlier. And this does a nice job of mapping out that we're talking about all education encompassing high school and beyond, all the way up to even a graduate degree. So a career pathway provides for students, for parents, for families, for employers, exactly what those particular careers that link with that particular education level should be or would be, and provides, this one's a little bit more, it's not as detailed as some of them, but it provides the know-how for students, parents, employers of exactly what students need to do as they're moving along that pathway. The reason I like this, I was talking actually with Secretary Holcomb today, and we were talking about these pathways as, it's kind of like an escalator with little platforms on the side, but only an upward escalator. You can't go down. So you can hop off, You can hop off, one step up if you want. You can hop off as the individual, and you can stop there. And you can, that's your ultimate goal, where you want to be. You find employment, but you can also stay there for a while and then hop back on and get up to the next level, and so on and so forth. Or you can stay on until you get to what we would call middle skills. So not quite an associate's degree, somewhere in between a high school and a full-blown associate's degree. The U.S. Department of Ed has actually generated some really, we find, useful visuals for thinking about how to do this kind of work, how to actually build flourishing pathways, career pathways. Again, cross-sector work with education, with workforce development, with folks in the workplace, and with our CTE centers. And one of the frameworks that we like to think about is this one, which has 6 key elements of how you actually generate career pathways. And we've shifted talking about career pathways to programs of study, because they necessarily include post-secondary options, such as the dual enrollment that we were talking about earlier. The first step in this framework is to build cross-agency partnerships and clarify roles. And as I've hopefully alluded to throughout the presentation so far, that has been happening. We can always improve, but certainly within state government, there has been a lot of attempts to actually get together, think about this kind of work, and generate sort of what we need for the next step. And I think the priority sectors work is a good example of that. Then we have to identify the sector or industry that you're focused on, and engage employers. So I think we've done the first part of that, but I'm here, as I said earlier today, to talk about that second part. And in some areas of the state, that is happening very well. So I don't want to give the impression that there are no employers engaged anywhere in these conversations. We're just hoping to have it be kind of the norm, as opposed to something cool and unique happening in a certain area. And then we need to design the programs. And that's actually what we are going to focus on for the next couple of years. That's what we're hoping to do. But we can't do it alone, as I said earlier. So, and then we have to do things like identify funding, all that kind of stuff, It's really critical. No one's laughing. Great. We do need to attend to aligning policies and programs along the way, and then it'll be really critical for us to actually, in a planful way, take a look at how we're actually measuring what we're doing. It doesn't necessarily mean with, surveys and things like that, but just, to have a way of actually pretty clearly knowing, like, were we successful in the kind of work that we set out to do. Often we forget about that piece when we're so busy actually doing our work in the trenches. So here is, based on that model, here's where we're actually proposing that we actually spend some time as a state. You've got these adult career pathways. Ideally, they're engaging employers. We should and will hopefully do better. Identifying industries and their needs is going to be a critical piece of that. We will also want to look at funding and sustainability and scale around those issues, and looking at, as I said, data and accountability. But then the new piece, and this is also coming from national conversations, as I've alluded to, is really how to think about moving that CTE model from a purely secondary sort of geography, if you will, to certainly include, partner with, embed post-secondary experiences into that. By the way, for education, that's kind of hard. For most educators that are K-12 educators, you've kind of set up your sights that your job is to educate K through 12, and then off they go next. So I just want to own that can be really difficult for some educators, some administrators to think about this, and that also holds, I think, for some of our CTE folks. So for many of us, myself included, it makes perfect sense. Well, why wouldn't we be thinking about these blended, intermeshed kind of systems? Because we haven't until now. And so I think we have to we have to just, I think, be sensitive about that as we move forward. And I think we're getting there. Okay, so what is the skin in the game that we're planning to do this coming year? We would really like to set up, initially focused on the healthcare sector. And by the way, if you want to see a fabulous draft of a program of study for health sciences, Eileen Aluzzi brought one to the meeting.
I don't have many copies.
She doesn't have many copies, but she might share it with you. So we are hoping to start with healthcare. As I alluded to earlier, there is a lot of work that's happening. North Country is a great example. There are some other places. And we'd like to capitalize on that to actually come up with a statewide program of study that can be accessible to more students, if not all students. So that's really the plan we're trying to get at here. Healthcare has the most promise because it's already happening like that in a program of study way, or it's emerging in really good ways in some areas. So what we're proposing is we start where we think we're going to have, I wouldn't say it's low-hanging fruit, because all of this is going to be kind of tricky to do, and it's going to take a lot of hard work. But we think that has the best, it has the best probability of success. Then we would like to very quickly move to manufacturing, which we know is a really strong and critical need for our economy. That infrastructure, like it is for health sciences with CTEs and others, is not there for manufacturing. And so it might be in certain pockets, but it's not there in a cohesive way like it is already for some areas in terms of the healthcare sciences. And so our goal is that we use healthcare sciences to learn what worked, what didn't, and then we go to a much more gnarly topic, which is manufacturing. These programs of study would actually include both secondary and post-secondary credentials. And as I've said many times, we really do need help from industry experts. We really need to be bringing together both CTE and our general education educators, which we've been doing actually at the Agency of Ed. I don't have time to talk about that today, but it's really, if you're interested in that, I can share some maybe in the breakouts. And certainly we need higher ed as partners in this, as well as our other interagency partners, labor, commerce, voc rehab, folks that we certainly need to keep those strong connections going with. We also, so that's, I think, that number one and number three are probably the most relevant to this group. But number two, we also will be doing as the Agency of Ed, which is conducting at least one, hopefully two center reviews this year, which we have to do as part of our typical monitoring process as the agency. But what we're really going to do is look at that review process from the lens of this programs of study, so that we can actually use that review and the outcomes of that review to inform the process that we're designing around the program of study work. We also think that the time is ripe. We've needed this for a long time. We don't really have a comprehensive career guidance system for students in Vermont. So folks might think that that's happening with our traditional guidance staff in high schools. For most places, it's not. Most of our guidance staff in schools are working on what we might call triage. So they're actually doing a lot of basic work with students that have some real severe needs, some real severe psychological needs, some real severe home challenges. So we need to right that ship in a way where we're actually providing what all of our students need around career guidance and individualized attention to what makes the best sense for that student. We think that the personalized learning plans, which have also been required as of recently in all 7th and 9th grade students' portfolios, which will then in the future be all 7th through 12th grade students, is a real key part of that. And what we would like to, what we plan to do is actually really encourage advisors in schools about, thinking about the inclusion of CTE experiences as part of these PLTs. And then finally, benchmarks for success in a monitoring plan. That's me. I do all that kind of stuff. I like it. More to come. I'll have a report on that later when we do it. So one last plug. way over time, sorry. We really could use your help in changing the conversation around career and tech education. I hope that we've shown that it's not an outdated model, it's not vocational. What I would also say is that it should be a mutual investment for all of us. So all of us are interested in ensuring that students in our K-12 system end up with great employment, end up satisfied and successful. So I'm hoping that we can find that common ground and move forward. I hope also that this has helped you learn more about CTE so that you can, in your own communities, maybe support kind of, a revaluing of career and technical education. What we really need to move this programs of study work forward is your assistance around what should these programs of study look like when they're related to your sector, to your particular type of job opportunities and careers that you're hoping to fill. That's really, really critical information for us to have. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of be where we've been. We've been talking about this for a while. So I'm here to hopefully get us to figure out a way to actually make some movement on that. Some more specific things just to think about. Some companies actually allow their employees we would hope that you would support a particular employee if they wanted to be on one of these consortia around programs of study, if you could. Again, like I just said, that input and that information is really critical to this process. You might consider sponsoring a CTE student in your workplace so that they could actually get some real hands-on apprenticeship type work-based learning. You might want to encourage your employees to serve as career mentors, particularly if you are in a sector where we know that girls are underrepresented. So if you have women in your career sector and you think that they would be great role models for other women, such as those young women in CTEs, that would be great. And then also, just to final plug, I'm just sharing information, and we'll hopefully the plan is for us to scaffold this and to reach out to you to get this information, to really share about the career ladders in your particular domain, your particular area, what competencies and skills are needed, and what opportunities do you see available now, and then do you see available as you look to the future, because we're kind of trying to do both of those with this approach. That's it. Sorry, I took
Does
Yes.
anyone have any questions?
Heather, you had a slide that said 41% of Vermont CTE students participated in what you call post-secondary. And I wonder if there's some way as we move forward to look at the data to really measure students who are going on, but it may not fit the traditional post-secondary model. And I'm thinking about apprenticeships, I'm thinking about employer-based training that may or may not earn or could earn CCV or VCC credits also. Yesterday I was at Martin Volvo. I was greeted by a service writer who was a CCV grad, and then the technician who worked on the car. Both of those young men I knew, and they participated in dual enrollment classes, which got them professionalized, really. But all of their post-secondary training has happened through Martin Volvo. Does not, as far as I know, have affiliated college credit attached. Those young men are making a lot of money, and they don't show up in the data, and they're certainly not the poor boy who didn't go to college that I was afraid that slide was leading us to go with that.
What I love about your question is that I think it's exactly the kind of thinking we need to do, so thinking outside the box. As a function of these consortia, that could be something that we design a better way, as a state at least, to capture that information. You're absolutely right. Right now, these college-going data come from the federal clearinghouse, which is really just accredited post-secondary institutions. either 2-year or 4-year. So there's a big gap there.
Mhm.
You know, otherwise what we're left with are sort of anecdotal information.
Right.
And those can be really compelling, but we really need a better way to do that. And so I think when we get our heads all together, we can figure that out. That would be one hope. So these programs of study start with, like, what does the content need to look like to get into these particular kinds of fields? But that's part of the accountability and the measuring piece I was talking about. How do we know that that happened? We're going to have to figure that out. It isn't going to be captured by the usual ways.
Yeah, there's another group that's looking at growing aspirations and talking about these high-value workplace certifications. Employers in the room really hold, I think, the key to helping us know what are those high-value workplace certifications that may not be the associate's degree or the bachelor's or the master's. What's the stackable credentials that we need to be designing and looking for in career and technical education, and in that place in between? Where can we be working with our colleges to assign credit and see what some employers are doing? How do we really make it happen?
I don't have the answer, but
I know.
I'm with you.
I know you, yeah.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, Heather, in terms of learning from other states, in terms of programs of study, the career ladder, the stackable credentials, isn't there a body of work out there that's already on CPE that we can?
Yes,
It's
and.
a little bit like you might be reinventing the wheel in areas where we might not need it.
Yes, and other states have a more unified system of CTE than we do. And so that's one of our challenges, like we have with K-12. So it's a great point, and I know that there are some states, I think Kentucky's doing some great work in this area. We actually talked about this in what Lynn's referring to, the Lumina conversation. So I do think as we prepare for these consortia, that would be sort of the homework, is to look at what aspects of other statewide consortia, because it is happening, we're not the only ones dealing with these issues. What actually seemed to work, what could we actually co-opt here in Vermont? What do we have to kind of start from square one with, because it's just not gonna work here? Or we need to change something.
And the only other thing I guess to mention was, on your outcomes slide, it's interesting, I mean, we had these outcomes, but just like the point you mentioned about our thinking is very, pre-K or K through 12, the statistics that you were citing were primarily K.
Their education.
Right, but then they drop off the chart when it comes to what, at the end of the day, what did those kids go on to do? And I know that information is really hard to gather, but until we gather that information, how do we know what we're doing is really helping our kids in terms of their futures and that sort of thing? And I know that's really a hard piece of information to track after high school sometimes, but I think we can really.
Well, we're trying to get there because we are working on a statewide longitudinal data system that will actually interface not only K-20 for education, but also with labor, with our other partners, certainly Voc Rehab. So I think that's a step in the right direction, but it's been slow going. And so I think it's an excellent question. I think it's one that I'd also like to see continue to, I'd like to see us make some progress towards that in the next couple of years, or instead of, we've kind of been in a holding pattern on that, and so, are there ways we haven't considered to actually get that information? And if not, let's consider them. If so, what's our plan B? I just think we need a little bit more oomph in that area, so. Yes.
Can you describe for us a 21st century guidance counselor?
In Vermont, or like
Well,
in the
or
world?
in a perfect world, perhaps, is the best way to do it. I mean, we've been told by some of the colleges that they work with them, but a lot of their time, as they see it, are in issues of taking care of acting out in the school
Yep.
system and stuff like that.
Yep.
That they're the cops, if you will.
Mhm.
But I assume, I would hope they're probably involved in the development of PLPs. I
Not
would-
necessarily,
Well-
some of, yeah,
That's the direction I want to go, the PLPs that they do, are they even-handed on when they look at continuing education, whether a CTE versus college is the better direction to go? Are there impacts on the finances of the school if there's more referrals into the CTE?
yes. So, the first question I'd like to take a stab at, which is what is a perfect 21st century guidance, and I would say system, look like? Because if we're putting a lot of stock in one person, it's there to help an individual student figure out all they need to know to be successful. I like to think of it as everyone's has a piece of this system, including parents, including teachers, especially as you move into middle school and high school. But it really would be focused on, first of all, what I'd like to see, what I think we need to see is that the different pathways that are available for students are valued equivalently, and I don't think that's the case. I think in my previous position, we had some data that was pretty striking, showing that for students in the Northeast Kingdom, they really thought that all guidance counselors cared about was going to college or not. That was it. You were either going to college or you weren't. I'm not sure that was true, but that's what the adolescents felt, and these were adolescents from a broad range. So I think that's an issue that we need to grapple with. I think that right now, certain students are probably getting what they need from the guidance area, and others aren't. I do believe that there's a lot of work going on. It's the way our state is set up. In other states, they have a different kind of system where the guidance counselors are still focused just on career development. So I think that in an ideal world, each student would have some kind of assessment, some kind of some inventory, or at least a pretty informed conversation about what their skill set was, the kinds of interests and capacities they had as a student that may or may not be linked with a career down the road. I don't think that that's happening as much as we'd like to see. I would like to think that we are moving toward, and what I'd like to see is moving toward a more flexible approach towards CTE coursework and other experiences, such as expanded learning opportunities that occur outside of CTE or the high school, and how those actually have an impact on students' educational trajectory. What does it mean if you volunteer all the time at a theater repertory and you're learning all of these, highly technical set design skills? Can that actually fit into, your actual career plans and or your credit for high school? So that's my first attempt. I have to think about that. It's a great question. I think I lost, did you have another question in there as well?
I mentioned the finance question about the
Yeah.
finances.
The financing is, I think that's going to take some more work to figure out exactly what the best governance and finance system is for CTE and K-12, broadly speaking. It's kind of difficult right now because of all the work happening around Act 46. But I don't think that means we don't consider these issues and hopefully be ready to really come up with some solutions. As folks who read the report know, we've actually asked for a study to actually dig into the financing a lot more, along with the government structure.
Those are the two main blockers. I mean, we did 17 centers that have different governance models. The funding is another challenge. But it seems like the curriculum in every one of the centers is different as well.
Yeah.
And I think we all know, anyone with children knows that it really should start in the middle school at the career path. When will we get a more uniform, universal, whatever, common curriculum throughout all of them? And I realize equipment is different, facilities are different. And when will it be open, like 9th through Those are probably not good questions, but.
No,
people are thinking.
well, they're
Yeah.
important questions.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to do the curricular piece, because we're trying to actually identify what are some statewide programs of study that we can actually promise to every student if they actually select this as their program of study. That doesn't mean that that will be the only programs of study that are available to students either. But what we want to do as the Agency of Ed is target our resources towards those priority sectors, because that's what, as a state, we're identifying our needs where we need to actually develop that common curriculum so that it works for students and it also works for employers. The finance one is tricky. So, and the reason why is, like, we could say, for instance, like, we should just have eligibility for all 9th and 10th graders, or entitlement for all 9th and 10th graders and 11th and 12th graders. There are some schools where that would be physically impossible, like that would just be financially, like they would have to close their doors. And I think, again, it's that we don't have tight district finance governance levels yet where all areas could absorb that equivalently. I think that's just a fact. I know it's not a popular point, but it's a fact right now. I wish it were different. Yeah.
Could we get industry's responses to this report and see what you think and what we'd like? That would be really helpful to me as a policymaker.
We're
Can
gonna drill
everybody
down
hear
a
that?
little in the, I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure everybody can hear that.
Yeah, we are gonna drill down in the breakout groups and hope to get some,
Okay.
response from the employers, and then we will follow up on that as well.
I didn't choose them. I've been here 5 months, so it happened way before I came. I'm getting some.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Moulton? Yeah, Pat Moulton.
Commissioner Moulton can speak to that.
Hi, I'm Pat Moulton. I'm the Secretary of Agency of Commerce and Community Development. We published a comprehensive economic development strategy that actually sits in the Commissioner of Economic Development, Joan Goldstein's shop. And we have a number of priority sectors, and the priority pathways mirror in large, most part, our priority sectors within the comprehensive economic development strategy, which is a really nice marriage to see happen. Which all, thank you very much, Annie, as she reminds me, it also mirrors where we see the greatest growth in occupations over the next, 5 years, 10 years, 5 to 10, the data that the Department of Labor has given.
So all parties kind of got together to share information and data to identify those. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair, and I mean, we have more sectors in our sets, but really trying to narrow on those top 6 with the work of the Agency of Education.
Valerie, yeah.
Do you have any, thoughts, Heather, on the best mechanism for gathering employers' thoughts on how we can build a better system? As a matter of routine,
Sure.
ongoing, how employers can input into what their needs are, and seeing.
So our
Can you
plan.
repeat the question, sort
Oh,
of?
yeah, so the question is a great one, is how, ideas about how employers can get this information to, I think, the consortium, that's the consortium they're developing?
Keep the conversation going on
Sure.
an ongoing basis.
Sure. So we are actually committed to a position in the Agency of Education that is actually going to lead this work. And so that, a primary goal of that position is going to be to design a system, probably some kind of electronic repository as one way. We will also be designing, coming out to regions to actually have conversations around this. And so we would certainly work with our workforce investment folks in the area, as well as all the folks here on the consortium idea to get the word out. So that's where we plan to start. We will be we will be looking for anyone and everyone to come to those conversations. It will not be restrictive at all. We would like, folks in the community as well, if they're not affiliated with any of these particular rules.
Heather?
Yes.
If I may, I
Yes.
personally think one of the best ways to keep this dialogue going is for employers to engage in the program advisory committees that every career technical center has for all their programs. And the importance of getting that feedback to the schools and have those committees be more than a rubber stamp, because I've been on some that are just rubber stamps, but to actually be meaningful about what are the certificates and credentials, how do you stack them, what are the curriculum elements that have to occur. And so that can start right now in every one of the 16 centers by employers engaging.
Thank you. And we could actually, I think, I will speak for Jay, we could actually provide contact information for those advisory boards after our meeting today so that everyone in this room actually knows who they could contact around that. So I was kind of jumping ahead to like the process moving forward, but that's a perfect, thank you, Pat, that's perfect.
So, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna throw this out. As part of what we're doing with the Career Pathways model in health sciences in the Northeast Kingdom, we actually did, with the same corporation, an employer engagement kind of meeting to find out how engaged they were in the development of the programs and what was going on. And we found out at that time, this was a couple of years ago, that they weren't very engaged. So, but we now better things to do. As we're doing health sciences and when we do advanced manufacturing, they're going to come in and we're actually going to try to get the advanced manufacturing people from the Northeast Kingdom in there to say, okay, these are the programs and these are the specific skills that you need to be doing. So that we're not developing a program of studies and then saying to them, is this what you want?
Right.
But instead having them actually help us develop the curriculum, build the program of study. And I don't think it's enough to just do that at the regional advisory board level for each school, because then, again, you'll have 16 different curricula for the 15 or 16 different kinds of manufacturing. It's a good way to start,
Right.
to take them all, but I think when we were talking about regional consortia a while back, it might be like one in the Northeast region and one in the Northwest region, and really talk about the business and industry needs there, get the employers engaged to tell us, this is the curriculum we need, this is the training.
I think that's a great idea. And we could also design something from, you know, the partners in the room around bringing everyone back together at some point to actually talk about it that way, if we choose to. So I think that that's a great point. And so you're talking about a slightly higher level or a bigger level that might encapsulate, let's say, 3 CTEs in one
Yeah.
area. That's what you're talking about. Yep. Good point. Yeah.
Heather, how much of what you're talking about that needs to get done has been done in other states that we could basically just steal and plagiarize? I mean, how much of this are we starting from ground zero? I understand that it's important to get the Vermont employer community very much involved, but it's always easier to work off a piece of paper that you can, you can edit, right? So I'm just wondering how much stuff has been done?
Jay's
By other
going to answer
states?
that. Because he tells me he can better than me, so I believe it.
I didn't say better, I just said I could answer it. So, the Federal Department of Labor has a competency model clearinghouse, and that would be the place where we would start with the healthcare sector. I was just looking at it today. It's already mapped out with, it's a pyramid, and it has identified the skills already. So it gives business and industry and educators something to react to instead of all sitting in a room kind of scratching our heads about where to start. So there's one for that. There's one for advanced manufacturing. That would be the starting place. And then as far as developing a program of study, we would want to rely more on our in-state post-secondary institutions more than out-of-state. So that might be opportunities for programs to be developed if the consortia identified some sort of lack, some area that wouldn't be covered in Vermont. So that's where we're starting from, and other states have done this. It's in those states, though, it's where there is a superintendent in charge of the entire school system, and they tell the schools what to do, which is not the system that we have in Vermont. So we have to take a little bit of a different approach.
So the original work, to start this going, we planned a year to really get that up and running and then have, you know, some concrete plans, you know, to report back on in a year. And we really think we can do that. Yes, that will be focused on healthcare, health sciences, excuse me. Yes.
And if you got to study the government funding, what kind of time would you?
Probably I would say within, depends on who's around the table, I guess, for that study. I think it could feasibly be done in a year as well. So, just to be clear, we do think the funding is really critical and important, and figuring that out is important, but we don't want to wait on that to do this other work. So that's why we're advocating that we're going to start using our resources and hopefully the will of folks in the room on this other work. But, you know, we'd have to pull in, finance people at the schools have not been involved in, you know, or at the agency have not been involved in this conversation so much. It's been very programmatic. And so I think that would be the real meat of that work, would be really digging into the dollars and cents and how that would look.
There seems to be the biggest impediment to almost all of it, going to work, is finance and government. You're dealing with individual schools, people use different boards, different types of governance, and it's a little impossible to make continuity between the two. I think that's the biggest challenge in
I would agree, but I also, I do think we can get some good work done above and, you know, while that's happening as well. I think if we do this right, that will only help things at the end of the day. I don't want to, I mean, I think that some of this work on curriculum and on just having a shared vision of what a program of study looks like doesn't, you know, it might need differential resources to bring that to bear and to actually offer it in year 2. But right now, I think we can make some good progress in terms of actually planning that out. Yeah.
Why does it take so long? It took 1 year to get the curriculum done for health and medicine? That's why.
Well, 1 year is our whole timeline for all the work we have to do as an agency in this area. So it was our broad timeline.
Actually, it takes a month to get it done, and it takes 11 months for everybody to agree on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not dealer.com. It's not that nimble. I wish it were.
I would assume at this point we have the curriculum down, and just like.
But we don't. We don't have them down.
Maybe
That's,
develop all at once, within like 3 or 4 months or something.
yeah. When I say a year, that's because I might think it's going to take longer, but we'll definitely have it done in a year. So. Yeah, I think Carol. Yeah. And what we would say is that, you know, we need to start the conversation to make that happen. I mean, what is the barrier? Is it that folks in different areas are thinking about that and not getting together to problem solve? Is it money, like an issue that can be solved you know, legislatively, those kinds of things. Yeah.
And I just wanted to springboard off of those last two comments. I'm up in St. Albans and also in our history about training. And when the report references international funding, we certainly cannot forget that drop-off point as this woman said, that does happen all the time in terms of the career piece. Well, you do have the LNA and the bombing. However, there are so many obstacles that we don't run into because we're not.
So your perspective, just that perspective, is really critical for these programs of study. I mean, I think that's a great example of why we need your applied perspective on what actually happens.
We're actually hoping that that is what will come up in the breakout group, because the question is, how can those of you who are not employers be in service to this process? That's the question. So Franco, get us there.
Heather, thank you very much.